then are we talking about the third sector? Why has it become so important? I think it's worthwhile having a little look at the context and also driving forces. The first thing that it's really important to say is that the third sector, while that may be a new label, organisations within the third sector are not new at all. The UK, including Scotland, has a long, long history of organisations and individuals involved in charitable giving, voluntary action, and also of small, locally based enterprises which are deeply embedded within their local communities. They provide employment opportunities, but they also give back to those local communities and taking care of the individuals and the households, perhaps by sponsoring a local sports team, donating resources to local schools, and generally taking care of their employees and the families of their employees. So please do not think that the types of organisations we find within the third sector are new. They're not new, the label is new. In terms of driving forces, we have to talk about the recession. The recession has created three scenarios, if you like, or three driving forces that have really given a rebirth to the types of organisations we find within the third sector. The first of these is that as a consequence of the recession, we're recognising the growing divide at local levels, regional levels, national levels and internationally. This divide between those individuals who have most, the richest individuals in the world, and the poorest. That divide, unfortunately, tragically, is growing. It's not narrowing, it's growing. And recognising that, governments and other individuals have increasingly become motivated to try and reduce that gap and identify what economic and social problems that creates and also lead to this gap. Unfortunately though, despite that growing recognition, given the recession, we know that public finances are becoming ever more squeezed, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment or two. So on the one hand, we have an awareness of government of the need to try to reduce the gap between rich and poor, but we also recognise that the recession has had a very detrimental influence on and impact on the money that government now has to try to reduce that gap. And because of that, more and more often we're finding that there's more interest in third sector organisations. What type of power, impact and potential can these types of organisations have to try to reduce that gap between rich and poor? So from a government point of view, government has done a couple. I'm going to talk about this at a UK level and then at a Scottish level. At a UK level, one example of the coalition government's interest in the third sector, when they won the last general election in 2010, the coalition government replaced the Office for the Third Sector with the Office for Civil Society. Now, this office, if you like, is based within the Cabinet Office, and it tends to focus on three things. One, making it easier for individuals and communities to set up and run charities, social enterprises and voluntary organisations. So cutting down on the red tape and making it easier to allow those organisations to flourish. Second key area of concern is to try and get more resources into the sector so that the third sector can become stronger, more resilient and also maintain its independence. So under the provision of the Office for Civil Society, government tries to get resources into the sector to build capacity, and that might be by providing training, by providing funding, by providing grants which try to allow third sector organisations to grow, to prosper and to become sustainable. And a third concern of the Office for Civil Society is to make it easier for third sector organisations to work with the state. And what this really means is that, guided by the Office for Civil Society, what the government is trying to do is to encourage local authorities and other public bodies, when they have a tendering process, to positively encourage tenders from third sector organisations. So almost recycling that public finance from the public sector into the third sector and sometimes the private sector. So trying to bring those three sectors together to have them working in collaboration. A second important strand of probably more the Conservative government under the leadership of David Cameron rather than the coalition government is David Cameron's interest in what he is calling big society. Now, it's really important for those of us within Scotland to realise that big society as a concept seems to have more relevance within, or resonates more within England than it does within Scotland. There hasn't been a lot of debate about big society within Scotland. And there's probably strong cultural reasons for that, that within Scotland we do find that more of us are employed within the public sector, and there does tend to be a very strong sense of society and community. But to turn to what we mean by big society for a moment, but some critics would actually suggest that rather than this concept being known as big society, it should be known as small government. Because what Cameron's view of a big society is to take power away from government and give it over to communities. It's about devolution, it's about really shrinking the size of central government and trying to encourage local communities and local authorities to have more control over education, policing and health. Now, given the fact that within Scotland we're already operating within a devolved government, you can see why big society is much less it just doesn't seem to be such a big deal within Scotland as it is elsewhere. Big society is also about trying to encourage social action, so trying to encourage us as individuals and as communities to get more involved in our communities and to volunteer. It's also about providing financial support, and it has created a big society bank, albeit with quite restricted funding. And another interesting aspect of big society is to publish government-held data and statistics, and there seems to be an obsession with providing statistics, for example, on crime, which actually is not on the increase as we're sometimes led to believe. So that's a kind of UK perspective. Let's look at what's happening particular to Scotland. There's no surprise that the Scottish Government is also interested in the third sector. The third sector is a large sector within Scotland. It's a really important sector within Scotland. And what the Scottish Government tries to do is to support and encourage third sector organisations in a number of joined ways, and in particular something called community planning partnerships and single outcome agreements. Let me just explain those to you. Community planning is a process that helps public agencies, local authorities, understand what is required by the local community. What services do they need? And increasingly what we find is that local authorities are looking to their third sector partners to ask them, what do you need for your communities? And let us look at the resources we have and think about how we can best use those resources to provide for the community. So community planning partnership is when local authorities will partner with third sector organisations to try to understand what services are required in that local community. Single outcome agreements. Now, these set out local outcomes that community planning partnerships are going to achieve. So these might be outcomes around schooling, around health, around education, around transport, and they will be together working with third sector organisations. Community planning partnerships will have dedicated, very precise, specific targets of what they expect to meet within particular timeframes. So within Scotland, there is a metric there to try to encourage the third sector to work with the state sector to identify public needs and then set targets to meet those needs. So why is this sector so important then? Let's have a little look at the scale and the size of the third sector. I'm not going to talk you through every single one of these figures, but let's just have a look at this, the top line figure here. At the moment, it's estimated that the third sector contributes around 116 billion to the economy. And you have a break, that's the UK economy, and you have a breakdown there for the contribution made by charities, cooperatives and social enterprises. The economic value of volunteering in the UK is estimated to be around £23 billion. So people, if you were to calculate how much it costs people to give up their time and to volunteer, that's an estimate of just how much volunteering is going on. So that's a fairly significant figure. It's also important to note that many third sector organisations are small, micro-sized organisations employing less than 10 people. So they're much smaller than the types of organisations you typically find within the public sector. What we also know about the third sector is that it's growing. If we look at figures for the workforce, since 1997, the number of people employed within the third sector has grown by 24%. Compare that with a figure of 9% in the private sector and 16% in the public sector. So it's far outstripping growth in other sectors. It's also becoming very professionalised, with the number of people working in the sector who have a degree increasing by 43% since 1995. So this is an attractive, growing sector of our economy. Some other figures here as well. We know that growth of the sector is influenced by its increasing role in what we might call the delivery of public services, health, education, transport. And we've got some figures here. I think one of the most interesting one is the one around charities, who received £7.8 billion in income from government grants in 2006-07. That's some of the most up-to-date figures that we have, compared to 4.2 billion in grant funding. So these organisations are not just about accessing grants. They're trying to attract income and to be financially sustainable. And a key way for third sector organisations to do that is by winning public sector contracts and providing public sector services. Okay, so as we draw towards the end, what are the implications of this then? I think it's fair to say now that the third sector is mainstream. This is not an add-on to the UK economy. This is central to the UK economy, providing job opportunities, employment opportunities alongside partners in the public sector and the private sector. So the third sector is a mainstream part of our economy, and many of you will go on, once you graduate, to work in private, public and third sector organisations. The attractive thing about third sector organisations is that given their growth, we've already looked at the figures for workforce growth, third sector organisations can offer attractive employment opportunities and the opportunity to combine being entrepreneurial with being innovative, whilst also addressing important social, environmental and health concerns. That offers a very attractive package for both employment and also setting up a social enterprise. The fact that third sector organisations combine income and profit with meeting social, community and environmental objectives is something that's becoming increasingly attractive to graduates. Future considerations then of the sector, this is our final slide. To continue flourishing, prospering and growing, the sector really must continue to move away from grant funding towards financing. That is, providing public sector services and goods. Continuous professionalisation of the sector can only be good. Therefore, as a graduate coming out of Strathclyde, many third sector organisations are going to want to work with you, given the experiences you've had here at Strathclyde, the skills that you've had and the useful learning, putting that into action within the third sector. And also what's going to be vitally important to the third sector is social innovation. Looking for innovations that can really help tackle social, environmental, and other public concerns in creative, flexible, sustainable ways. That's me finished. I hope you've enjoyed this lecture. Thank you.